Nice buns, soft, fluffy, and ultra-low net carbs. Discover Hero Bread, the delicious ultra-low net carb bread with incredible taste and texture. Hero Bread has 0 grams of sugar and is under 100 calories per serving. Plus, high in fiber with 5 to 10 grams of protein per serving. Available on Amazon.com, Walmart.com, and at hero.co. That's HERO.co. Delicious, ultra-low net carb Hero Bread buns and tortillas. Soft and fluffy, high in fiber, and with 0 grams of sugar, up to 10 grams of protein, coming in at under 100 calories. Order today at hero.co and use the code AH10 to get 10% off your first purchase. That's AH10 at hero.co. HERO.co. Order from hero.co now and get 10% off your first purchase with promo code AH10. That's 10% off with code AH10. HERO.co.
This is
Make It Plain.
MIP
With Masamela Matfumo.
Mark Thompson.
Make it plain.
Get woke.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of Make It Plain, and joined here by 2 friends. We'll get their reaction to a number of things, but we're going to talk primarily about a piece they co-authored on Kingian democratic socialism. But before we do that, I think we'd all do well first. I want to kind of get their thoughts about the latest. There's been another police killing in Minneapolis while this trial is taking place. First of all, my guests today are Kai Newkirk and the Reverend Stephen A. Green, both my comrades and brothers in the struggle. Kai is the founder of For All, a center for nonviolent action to advance fusion progressive agenda. And he led the 2016 Democracy Spring campaign, one of the largest American civil disobedience actions of this century. You all remember Democracy Spring. My brother in ministry is also here, the Reverend Stephen A. Green. He's a social justice pastor at Greater Allen AME Cathedral of New York and chair of Faith for Black Lives. Welcome to you both. And speaking of Black Lives, Stephen, let me begin with you. What are your thoughts about this trial? And now there's another, well, there have been several police killings, but one even in Minneapolis, in the same doggone city, while the trial is going on. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think, thank you, Mark, for having us, and it's good to be with Kai as well. What we're seeing is that the incident that happened with George Floyd is not isolated. And I think that what this moment is trying to continue to unravel for us, all the way from my Army brother who was assaulted by police, and the video came out this week, to even the case yesterday with our dear brother Dante, is that we're literally at war for Black lives in this country to affirm the dignity of all persons. And police and state-sanctioned violence is almost inherent to the American culture. And when we talk about, whether or not Derek Chauvin will be held responsible for the murder of George Floyd, we must also talk about the system that must be held responsible for continuing to perpetuate these heinous acts around Black life in this country.
Kai, your thoughts about this latest incident, and Kai, let me ask you this too. Knowing the enormous movement of reckoning we saw last summer, even with white citizens and around the world. I mean, people around the world were mobilized, and people around the world are watching this trial. Can America can this country afford for Derek Chauvin not to be found guilty?
I would say no. I mean, not unless we want to just see the profound generations of trauma laid upon one another just become deeper and explode again. And I'm heartened by the historic uprising of last summer. I think there's been a durable change in the culture, and sometimes it takes time for that to play out in institutions. But we're on that march now. But I think people can't take anymore. And if justice isn't done in this verdict, I think it's going to just deepen so much pain. I haven't followed everything with the trial on a day-to-day basis. From what I've seen so far, I'm encouraged that there will be a guilty verdict. But it seems like some of that has happened by contrasting Chauvin's actions from the department as a whole and their policy. And that may be helpful for bringing a guilty verdict and may be true, but in some ways it lets the Minneapolis Police Department off the hook and avoids having the deeper conversation within the context of the trial about the broader system of policing, the carceral system in our country, the deeper institutional and systemic racism that has to be confronted for us to move to a period of time in which something like what's happened outside of Minneapolis again becomes shocking and incredibly rare and hopefully non-existent.
Yeah. Stephen, do you think we're going to win this case, win this trial? How are you feeling confident about this trial? I mean, the evidence is strong, but
yeah, I hope so. I hope that the family of George Floyd is able to receive justice in this case. But we know that true justice is not just about, an officer being convicted. We must really end qualified immunity in this country, ban no-knock warrants, create a system of policing, police accountability in this country, which means that we should also be talking about focusing the attention in this case and even in the recent attack yesterday around actually federal legislation and Joe Manchin standing in the way of passing Justice and Policing Act. And we was really put pressure on the Democrats who were elected and with the majority. They told us in November, if we go back out in January and get Georgia, then we were going to have the majority to be able to see some legislation passed in this country. Right. And we've yet to see it. And so I think this is a moment to really try to channel the energy towards actual legislation that would transform policing in this country and stop the tongue-in-cheek. It's time for thoughts and prayers.
Yeah. And the democracy or the majority that people fought for in Georgia is being undermined by one person, one doggone person. Now, I don't want to get too far off subject, but let me just try to explain to people what's happening. This Wednesday, for the first time in history, there will be a markup of the reparations bill, H.R. 40, which means the next stop will be vote on the floor of the House. Stephen's going to help me get our senator brother to do his job in the Senate. But also, speaking of what you're talking about, Stephen, also on Wednesday, the House Oversight Committee is going to mark up the DC statehood bill. The DC statehood bill is probably going to go to the floor the week of April 19th. And now Manchin has said he's somewhat favorable towards statehood. If we get DC statehood, Kai and Stephen, there's two senators, undoubtedly Democratic, most likely black. We ain't got to worry about this majority or this filibuster anymore. And then Manchin can just act like the fool he wants to act. In fact, it would be in his interest to vote for DC statehood so he can continue to play whatever his role is. Nobody can understand in West Virginia, even because most people think he's not going to run for election. So nobody understands what he's doing. But if we get statehood, see how it never stops. We thought we had what we needed in Georgia from January. That's not enough. So we got to get statehood to make even the Georgia piece work. So I just want to put that out there to people. We won't get a vote on the reparations bill till probably the summer, but next week. Now, if Manchin blocks statehood, then three of us might need to make a little run down to West Virginia. But anyway, let's get to the point. And this ties in because we got to talk about where we are as a people, as a community, as coalitions of organizations, as a progressive or left movement, whatever you want to call it. Kai, what other movement is there if it's not progressive? I mean, there's not a moderate movement. There's a ultra right wing white supremacist white nationalist movement. Mm-hmm. But on our side, the only movement I see is a progressive movement and a BLM movement, and the two complement each other and intersect.
Hey man, you gotta give me a second though, because I'm living in Arizona now. So I gotta say that it's not just Joe Manchin who's holding up things in the Senate.
Oh my God.
Kirsten Sinema, our senator.
What is that? What's up with this? Has she read the latest demographics of her own state?
I'm not sure. I think she's got this idea about that she's kind of the sequel to John McCain's kind of maverick identification challenging her party. But I think she's miscalculated terribly. Her polling has gone down since she gave the thumbs down on 15 in such a flamboyant way since she's been talking publicly about blocking any change on the filibuster. She doesn't understand that the voters that elected her, like you say, need change. We want results now, and it's much more important to us that we have that than that we preserve these traditional Senate rules and procedures like the filibuster itself, a Jim Crow relic. So I'm from West Virginia. I understand the problem with Manchin, but it's not just him.
Does she know Mark Kelly just won?
How could she not? And he's doing much better in the polls. And this whole idea that you have to try to govern like her in order to win in Arizona, he's proven that wrong right now. We're going to reelect him. He needs to do better on some things, but he voted the right way on 15, and he signaled openness to reform on the filibuster if it continues to block progress.
So are we going to draft Erica to run for Senate in Arizona?
Well, I wish we could. She's not a citizen yet, but it takes a couple years after marriage, but it could move faster if we pass the DREAM Act. So we'll see.
Okay. More MIP after this message. No, you're right. You're right. She's a problem too. So we got to figure that one out. But in any event, those two characters aside, I mean, any movement toward holding the government accountable, corporations accountable, our own Democratic Party accountable, is the progressive movement. Correct?
That's what I see. There's not much of a culture of building movements and organizing as movements outside of the progressive left in our country. Although you point out on the far right that is the case, but that's not going to get anything done for us. So that's not our focus at the moment.
You all, Reverend Stephen, wrote a piece at wagingnonviolence.org, folks. Why Kingian democratic socialism is the best path forward for the progressive left. So this was published on the anniversary of Dr. King's martyrdom. Just last week was Easter Sunday. So, Reverend Stephen, some people haven't quite put together Dr. King and socialism. So let's help folk with that first of all.
Sure. I think when we talk about socialism, we have allowed this word to be co-opted by, the CIA's mentality to try to dismantle the movement. But Black social gospel or socialism is inherently rooted in the Black social gospel tradition, all the way from Reverend E. Cash's Ransom and other Black social gospel leaders who help, transform life post Reconstruction, right? In settlement houses in Chicago and an institutional church, and also in New York City. So, I think when we talk about Dr. King's ties, Dr. King is a part of a long lineage of African-American religious leaders who are tied to the social gospel that infuses their political ideology. So Dr. King is a democratic socialist who agrees that democracy in and of itself should be social. It must contend. It contends that it must be engaged in not just access to voting, but also in ensuring that there's a quality of life, education. And so you see this in this Poor People's Campaign that it's about not just on the heel, on the backs of in a year that it was actually, a presidential election. People forget that in 1968, they were going to a presidential election trying to figure out who was going to come after LBJ. And Dr. King infuses civic engagement with a policy agenda, an issue-based agenda of economic justice. And I think that when we talk about Dr. King, they try to silo Dr. King in 1963, 1964, but Dr. King's actual fullness of his political ideology emerges out of his stance of economic justice, racial justice, and transformative political justice that all intersect together.
Kai, do those in the democratic socialist movement embrace Dr. King? Do they see him as a relevant symbol in that movement today?
I think some do. I'm not sure everyone is focused on him as someone who's really kind of setting the standard and creating the legacy that democratic socialists in general and those on the progressive left want to follow. And that's part of what we wanted to bring. I think with this piece, we're trying to speak to a few different audiences at the same time. One is a general public, right, that often has only been taught about one King, which is a limited focus on his concern for racial justice, right? But they're not getting the full, broader social and political critique, which was concerned, yes, with capitalism and also with militarism and empire, the giant triplets of evil that he talked about in the Poor People's Campaign. So we want to be one of the voices that's trying to lift up that fuller vision for the general public, but also want to speak to some in the world that's very focused on King's legacy, in particular Kingian nonviolence. It's a wonderful tradition developed by Dr. Bernard Lafayette, one of King's lieutenants, and David Jensen that both Stephen and I have trained in. But in our view, doesn't often bring in his broader political critique of institutions in our society and push people as much to do the particular kind of work that King is most remembered for, which if he had just given speeches, I don't think there'd be a monument, right? He used the power of nonviolent direct action to do these campaigns that confronted injustice in a powerful way, focused the attention of the nation on it, made it so that business as usual could no longer continue. We want political organizers to be doing that kind of work. And then thirdly, to folks who self-identify within this resurgent democratic socialist tradition in our country, coming out in large part of the Bernie Sanders campaigns, the growth of DSA, people like AOC and folks in the squad, right? There's this huge growth. And to say, let's look at King and this incredible and complex fusion that he brought together, a tradition that we think can help us to build the multiracial progressive movement from the base up and as broadly inclusive as possible, that can help us to win. And I think there's a push that King makes on us on the left, I think at times, which is to really, there's a range of them which we try to go through in the piece, but I think one is to seek constantly to be rooting our action and our critique in this ethic of universal, unconditional, compassionate love, which is a hard thing to do. And there's a place for righteous anger within that, but it enables us always to be pulling people towards higher ground and to be bringing people in and understand that whoever you are, whatever you thought in the past, whatever you did in the past, there's a place for you on the side of justice and the freedom struggle to join in movement. And I think that sometimes the weight of trauma, the weight of pain, the weight of cynicism can close that door down. And King counsels us, we have to always keep it open.
Kai, Reverend Stephen mentioned the multiracial coalitional aspect of this. And Stephen, let's face it, multiracialism is the goal. But when we talk about the African-American community, there are those who, as I said, see Dr. King in one way, and especially the faith community in which we organize. They don't necessarily embrace socialism, although many do without realizing it.
Right.
Most of our movements, and Dr. King truly was a socialist, whether he used that terminology or not. Let's face it, when he was on the earth, socialism was closely aligned with communism, and nobody could afford to have that label without being taken out. And ultimately he was. How easy will it be, Reverend Stephen Green, to marry the African-American liberation struggle rooted in the church to a philosophy that we would call Kingian democratic socialism? I mean, let's be honest, brother. I can name a few preachers you and I know by name. If we said that to them, they'd be like, "What?"
Right.
So
yeah.
So tell us how we mount that challenge.
You raise a very pivotal question. These buzzwords have created a level of resistance in our own communities. And I think that, we have to talk about the issues that ground this democratic socialism as the issues that connect with grandmothers in our own pews, in our own churches, right? Like, let's talk about what a guaranteed annual income looks like, right? And then we talk about, but you have to really, when you talk about democratic socialism, you have to really uncover the layers of how the Homestead Act prevented Black folks from being able to literally be able to have access to quality housing in this country, and the history of redlining. Like, so these are all what I would call democratic socialist ideas and principles of guaranteed annual income, jobs for all, housing for all, a Green New Deal, right? But having to communicate this as a restructuring of society, because that's truly what a democratic socialist vision would cause for America to have to participate in, is a truly restructuring of society. You're talking about childhood education, and we have to recognize, as Dr. King says, that the Homestead Act gave thousands of acres of land to white folks, right? But we call it welfare when we try to do something, the government benefits for African Americans in this country, entitlements for white folks, welfare for Black folks. And I think that we have to literally break down the issues, and we'll find commonality when we talk about the issues. And I think that's what we talk about with the democratic socialist community and the Kingian sort of faith-based organizing tradition, civil rights tradition that we're in, is that we're trying to talk about the same principles, but we're not talking about the same, pathway towards the principles and ideas. And I think that's where we have to really break down, because, I hear some of the seasoned saints talking about, well, I had to pay for college. Why y'all want college for all? When we don't recognize that college now has been a part of this capitalist industrial complex of student loans, right? That literally weighs upon people as a form of debt, that is a part of a government fractured system that has not grown. Pell Grants, my parents went to school, you could take a Pell Grant and be able to afford your entire tuition and have money to live off of, right? Nowadays, the Pell Grants are not going to help you do anything in most, public institutions. So we have to talk about expanding some of these concepts in ways that are palatable, because we all want the same vision of a beloved community. But what is the policy agenda that articulates a beloved community? I think that's what democratic socialism will help us do.
Yeah. And Kai, you are right in the piece about the importance of the fusion, the importance of democratic socialists and working class people coming together with the formidable African American electorate. And in order to get some of these things that we're talking about, in order to address climate change and minimum wage and all that, what you all written is not just some intellectual philosophical exercise. That type of fusion is necessary and urgent for anybody to get anything in terms of what this democracy is supposed to be, correct?
Absolutely. There's no way forward but together. There's no other path to the change that we need but through a progressive left that can become not the junior partner, but the senior partner in the Democratic Party, can become the leader of that and thus govern our nation through a period of transformation. There's no other pathway, and there's no other way to do that but together. And that's what we're pushing people towards here. And on the question you asked, Stephen, about, we should just try to deal with the truth, try to deal with the facts, right? And we want to honor the full king and not pick and choose, okay? And so he wasn't really loud about it. He certainly wasn't dogmatic or sectarian about it. But there is a truth and there's a factual history to his critique of capitalism, which is a radical one, and his embrace of democratic socialism as the path that we need to look forward. And you can, in a 1961 speech to the I forget the exact name, but the Negro American Labor Council, I think it was, which was the Black focused form of the AFL-CIO. He said that call it democracy or call it democratic socialism, but we need a better a distribution of wealth for all of God's children in our country. He used the language in a speech to the SCLC board, said maybe we need to move towards democratic socialism. So you see in that it's not dogmatic, it's not sectarian, it's not strident, and of course he's dealing with the political limitations of the time, but at least it's honest. So whether somebody on Twitter that says, hey, this is revisionist history, talk about Kingian democratic socialism, or it's a Black preacher whose work and leadership I would respect so much, we have to say, well, I hear you, but let's look at the facts, let's look at the record, and let's honor King enough to really embrace his full legacy and carry that forward.
and you alluded to this a little bit earlier, Stephen, how people have been fed one speech on one day. Too many of us, including folk who look like Dr. King, only know 1963, I Have a Dream. Many people don't know what Kai just said. They and that's why it goes viral. Every year about Black History Month, somebody will post a video of Dr. King saying, I'm black and I'm beautiful. And everybody's shocked. Oh, he actually said that. Yeah, he said it. We saw it. When they post the speech about the Homestead Act, when he's basically calling for reparations, people are shocked about that. So, I mean, it's incumbent upon us, even as African Americans, to get to know, in Kai's words, the full King.
And I think that understanding a seminal figure that is a moral leader that has a political theology wrapped inside of his theology, right? Like, and I don't think we always tease out that Dr. King is a political strategist who is also a practical theologian, right? Like, so he's infusing, in this Beyond Vietnam speech, right? He's talking about ways that we all can see beyond and create this new world order, this new heaven, this new earth, by literally talking about the issues that are surmounting, right? And that level of infusing the sacred and the secular, holding the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in another hand, of infusing and really challenging and offering a critique is actually the work of prophetic resistance, right? And so we have too many preachers who would like to romanticize King and just, I don't even think King has a true pietist theology, right? He's hardly ever talking about salvation and what, or something around, this esoteric kind of ephemeral reality. He's literally always talking about challenging systems and structures, because institutional salvation is far greater than individual sort of like salvation and sin that the traditional Black church is now co-opted as their meta narrative.
Yeah. And the whole prosperity piece as well. More MIP after this message. But now, Kai, let me challenge you now, because we were talking earlier about, Joe Manchin and some of these other characters. The very working class that you talk about in the piece, some of that working class is in West Virginia, is in the South, right, where they're being pushed toward, this resurgent white nationalism. But it was Dr. King that organized the South and transformed the South. So isn't a part of this figuring out a way not only to fuse, the African-American political movement and democratic socialists, which I think will be easier than trying to get those working class jokers who Trump somehow was able to get to. But I mean, that's a challenge too. We've got to figure out how to get them to see what Dr. King was talking about in terms of race being used to convince them that they're not really poor like us.
Absolutely. It's crucial. It's always been the case, an effort to divide poor people and working people on the basis of race by an elite, whether it's slaveholders in the South or the big factory owners in the North or the billionaire class of today, to say that rather than coming together to divide people and to demonize and to scapegoat, right? And they've targeted white, poor, and working class people the most to say, hey, don't join with those people. Don't look at what you have in common, right? They're the problem. These immigrants are the problem. These Black welfare moms are the problem, right? Always to use this racial division tactic, right? Rather than keep people together, and to say that they've got something more to gain, to say that the wages of whiteness, right? The benefit of that, if you stick with that, is going to be better than what you can get in this multiracial working class formation. And you can make an argument that that was true at some point, but it is not true today. It is not true today. Poor and working class white people in many parts of this country are suffering profoundly, and their lifespan is getting shorter, and their conditions are getting worse. And the only way forward is to come together and to understand that voter suppression, and Reverend Barber does a great job talking about this, is not just about racism. It's about class too. And it's saying that if you can keep folks from voting, the people that are being targeted, it prevents the coalition that can do the things that might lift people up, that are going to lift all of us up, whether it's Medicare for all, or whether it's a federal jobs guarantee, or it's a guaranteed minimum income, or it's paid childcare, or free college and university. All of these things are going to benefit all the working class, right? And in some places, most of the beneficiaries are going to be poor and working class white people, most in just numerical terms, right? And Heather McGhee has a great metaphor in her book about the drained pool, that in some of these areas after integration, there were white folks in neighborhoods who would rather have their public pool drained so nobody could use it,
right,
than to have it be integrated and so they could share it with black and brown folks. And that's a sickness in the heart that we have to get at. And I think there's a healing power in King's teaching that pulls us towards higher ground that can help to do that. But we also have to speak to the nuts and bolts of it. Is wouldn't you rather have a pool, period, for your kids to swim in? And I think that message is one that we got to bring to white working class and poor people across the country, and do so in the context of a fusion movement that invites people in to say, we're going to get to higher ground together.
He talked about Appalachia too. He did, for sure.
Absolutely. It was critical to the Poor People's Campaign.
Yeah. So Stephen, how do we get this ball rolling? What are you all thinking about in terms of strategy, conversation, dialogue to bring this multiracial coalition in the name of Kingian democratic socialism?
Sure. I think when we talk about, infusing the democratic socialism or teasing it out of the Kingian legacy, I don't want to also disconnect King from his strategy of nonviolent resistance as a form of social change. And I think that's truly what I think has to come out of this fusion movement, is that strategically using nonviolent resistance as a form of social change is one of the greatest resources we have as movement people in this earth, right? Is that the power of collective mass mobilization. And I think we need to see this fusion coalition come together and target the filibuster. Like the filibuster is single-handedly the most important legislative challenge or tool or rule change that is of our time, that literally stands in the gap between literally protecting the right to vote, reforming the immigration system, protecting Black lives through criminal justice reform, DC statehood, reparations, right? Like HR 40 and SR 40 will not pass without ending the filibuster. I mean, we know that all of the democratic, progressive, democratic socialist ideas and policies that we would like to see enacted, we can literally see happen in our lifetime and literally before 2022 if the nonviolent resistance couples with the democratic socialist fusion coalition, and we emerge together to single-handedly build a coalition to end the filibuster. So that means, brothers and sisters from the Latinx community, as well as brothers and sisters from the Black Lives Matter community, from the DREAM Act to the Justice and Policing Act, coming together to say, hey, we're ready to come to Joe Manchin and Cinema's door, and through nonviolent direct action and engaging in resistance in the streets to really make this a national cry. Like I was saying earlier, we have to create another Selma watershed moment. We have to create another watershed moment that would literally suggest that nonviolent resistance that is disciplined, that is strategic, that is consistent, would tend to topple over the challenges of white supremacy that continues to hold over the United States Senate as a part of this Jim Crow relic of the filibuster. So whether that looks like all of us converging into DC and recreating the democracy spring, or whether that means we're going to Joe Manchin's office in Charleston, West Virginia. We have to see faith leaders and civil rights leaders and immigration activists and Green New Deal activists and gun reform activists literally all putting their bodies on the lines through nonviolent resistance to end the filibuster.
How has the piece you've written, been received, Kai? What kind of reactions have you gotten, even from within the movement?
I've only heard positive stuff so far. I think that people, digging into it, thinking about what the implications are, reaching out with support. And I think we want to continue the conversation. We didn't have a plan in terms of, hey, this is where we're going to go with this, beyond trying to initiate a conversation, invite people in to really think about it. But I think that's gone well so far. I'm grateful to be on with you today to continue that. And I think my hope is that we can encourage a conscious embrace of it, right? So that when we're organizing, that we're talking about, these are these values that come together, these are these methods that come together, and this is a way we understand it. And so that if somebody's saying, "Oh, what's that you talking about? This crazy socialism," we'll say, "I'm following in the tradition of Dr. King, right? And this is this way that we're trying to do that, right?" And so I think we'll see where that goes, right? But I think what Stephen is talking about is the next step in terms of putting a lot of that vision into practice, whether we call it this, say, this is what we're doing in this Kingian Democratic Socialist Initiative or not. It's what needs to be done. And it speaks to the strategic dimension, which we haven't gotten into as much, is that King was really pushing us towards this fusion of grassroots organizing, movements, and mass militant nonviolent direct action, and electoral politics and mobilizing majorities to vote and govern, and really seeing how those can fit together. And it's not necessarily easy, right? As anyone who's elected somebody, right, and been a force in that, and then done a sit-in at their office, that's not necessarily easy to hold that intention, right? But it's what has to be done, and it's very difficult to do if you don't have nonviolent discipline. And I think that this fight now to end the filibuster and open the door to progress on all these different issues for our entire coalition represents a great opportunity to build in that direction.
Yeah, it is. Folks, we invite you to go to, let me see if I can put it up on the screen before we go. The piece is Waging Nonviolence, and it is...
that's where it's at.
Waging Nonviolence.org, correct. That's where it's at. And you all can check it out. There it is. Why Kingian Democratic Socialism is the best path forward for the progressive left. We invite you to go to wagingnonviolence.org and read about it and be educated. Our guests are absolutely right. This is a conversation that must absolutely take place. We have got to get to this. And again, you all know I'm a big proponent of Dr. King's speech at the end of the March from Selma to Montgomery. And he talked about working class whites and working class African Americans coming together, and the ways in which we are kept deliberately divided from one another. That's purposeful. And so all this stuff on January 6th, there's a reason for that, because God forbid that all of us come together and realize what our common goal and agenda can be. And so I want to thank my guests, Reverend Stephen A. Green, Brother Kai Newkirk. Gentlemen, you know I'm with you on this all the way, and whatever I can do to be supportive, just let me know, and let's try to figure out some ways to get people organized and get this all together. Okay.
Hey man, thank you so much for having me,
Mark, for always opening your platform to be able to have these conversations with our people. And I think this is where it starts. We have to reimagine Dr. King's legacy. Right. They have romanticized Dr. King. We've given him a holiday. We pacified him. We have these parades and call them marches. But what would it look like to engage in nonviolent direct action consistently through this level of or strategic organizing? Because what we're up against is a very heightened challenge after January 6th. I don't think people, the organizing that we did in November or even this past summer has to be transformed now that we're talking about life after January 6th. January 6th exposed the very fragility of the American democracy, and that white supremacy is embedded in the highest levels of our government, right? Like this, to be able to attempt to overthrow a democratically elected election in the world's alleged strongest democracy, it shows a very gaping hole in the very fabric of our nation. And right. I think that we, the level of attack that we're facing, we don't, they're talking about forming a 9/11 style commission around January 6th. And I think that needs to happen. But we're literally talking about people at the highest levels of our government who were operating in or non-cooperative in trying to protect or to defend or to resist the attack on our democracy. So this is about democracy. This is about the future of the state of our country. It's not just about Kingian democratic socialism. This is about the future of our planet. right? Which relies upon working people working together to create a beloved community. So thank you again.
Yeah, no, that is where we have to go. WagingNonviolence.org, folks. Be sure to check out the piece, Why Kingian Democratic Socialism is the Best Path Forward for the Progressive Left. That's your homework assignment, everybody. All right. Thank you. I want to thank again Kai Newkirk, the Reverend Stephen A. Green. Follow them on Twitter, Kai Newkirk and Green the Rev. Keep up with all they're doing. A lot more organizing going on. You going to Minneapolis, Stephen?
I might have to.
Yeah. We all might have to. Folks, we keep all,
especially with this trial coming up at the same time.
Yeah. We want to keep everybody who is impacted, not only by the pandemic, but the police demic, and the pistol demic of gun violence. We want to keep everyone lifted up and pray for protection, not just thoughts and prayers and doing nothing, but pray for some real change, some real legislation, all of that. And prayer happens not just with your hands forward, but with your feet.
Yes.
And what Kai and Stephen are talking about in tradition, Dr. King, people didn't call him Dr. King, oh, let's just pray. He prayed with his feet, and he mobilized and organized. And the difference, folks, we have to be clear, it's more to it than just the feeling and the myth that people were literally organizing and working and being strategic. It wasn't random. It wasn't just folk all over the place. It wasn't folk just tweeting is social media, not social movement. All right. So just tweeting up a storm, that's just part of it.
Exactly.
But being able to get in the streets.
That's digital organizing. And that's Angel's cue in all of that. And you can do stuff, but you actually have to have boots on the ground, right. Butts in seats. And that's why I think the model of having, the mass meetings, right? Well, Sunday night mass meetings. There should be more work done. We talking about this now. There should be more work done in the movement to extrapolate the power of the mass meetings to create the political consciousness and the spiritual power that goes into building these kinds of movements.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And tweets aren't votes. What happened in Georgia in January, folks, has to become second nature to us. We can still do better. And we all have to vote and vote for what's in our best interest. Get to those working class folk too, Kai. Encourage them to stop voting against their own interests. All of this has to happen. But, we can go on and on and on. This is just the beginning, folks. Look forward to more of these conversations. Kai, Reverend Stephen, thank you both, okay?
Thank you, brother.
All right, thank you both. Thanks for getting woke and listening to Make It Plain. Please remember to listen, like, and wherever you get your podcasts, please give the show a 5-star rating. And please do spread the word. Let's all continue to pray for each other during this pandemic and this police demic. If all hearts and minds are clear, it has been made plain.
Not all bread is created equal. And if you like yours soft, fluffy, moist, and delicious, then Hero Bread and Buns should be your first choice. But Hero Bread isn't just about taste and texture. It's high in fiber with ultra-low net carbs with 0 grams of sugar. Order today at hero.co and use the code AH10 to get 10% off your first purchase. That's AH10 at hero.co, HERO.co for 10% off your first purchase.